Nobody expected a simple press conference question to ignite one of the biggest conversations in tennis. Not because of a controversial answer, not because of a rivalry, but because one rising star looked directly past some of the biggest names in women's tennis and singled out one player he believed the sport simply could not afford to lose. And when those words left his mouth, the entire tennis world stopped and listened. The question seemed harmless enough. Arthur Fils had just completed another impressive run, proving that his rise through the ATP rankings was no accident. Reporters gathered around him expecting the usual answers about Wimbledon, grass court preparation, and his goals for the season. Everything felt routine. Then someone asked him about the women's game. It was the kind of question athletes hear all the time. Which players have impressed you? Who do you enjoy watching? Who stands out? Most people already knew what answers were coming. Maybe Coco Gauff. Maybe Mira Andreeva. Maybe the dominant champions already established at the top of the rankings. Instead, Arthur Fils said something nobody saw coming. Alex Eala. For a brief moment, the room seemed to freeze. The reporters exchanged glances. Pens stopped moving. Faces changed. Because this wasn't just another compliment. This wasn't a player casually mentioning a colleague. Arthur Fils wasn't talking about someone he practiced with every day. He wasn't talking about a friend from his own tour. He wasn't even talking about someone he had ever competed against. Yet the conviction in his voice made it impossible to ignore. And then he went even further. He explained that women's tennis was overflowing with talent. Great champions. Incredible athletes. Future stars. But without Alex Eala, something would be missing. The WE, he suggested, would feel incomplete. That single statement exploded across social media within minutes. Fans replayed the clip over and over. Analysts debated every word. And suddenly one question began spreading across the tennis world. What exactly does Arthur Fils see in Alex Eala that others might be missing? The answer would reveal something much bigger than rankings, trophies, or statistics. Because sometimes the people who understand greatness best are the ones fighting for it themselves. That's what made this moment so different. Tennis legends have praised Alex Eala before. The sport has already seen icons acknowledge her talent. Those compliments carried weight because they came from people who had conquered the game at the highest level. But praise from a legend and praise from a contemporary are not the same thing. A legend sees potential. A peer sees reality. Arthur Fils isn't watching from a television studio. He isn't reminiscing about the past. He's living the same journey. He's traveling the same exhausting schedule. He's dealing with the same pressure. He's fighting through the same doubts. He's chasing the same dream. And that changes everything. At just 21 years old, Fils understands exactly how difficult it is to survive in modern professional tennis. Every match matters. Every ranking point matters. Every mistake gets magnified. Every weakness gets exposed. For someone living that reality to look across the sport and identify Alex Eala as uniquely important carried a level of authenticity that fans immediately recognized. What nobody realized at that moment was that Arthur wasn't speaking emotionally. He was speaking analytically. The more reporters pushed him to explain his answer, the more fascinating his reasoning became. Because he wasn't talking about popularity. He wasn't talking about marketing. He wasn't talking about social media followers. He was talking about tennis itself. The way Alex Eala thinks. The way she processes pressure. The way she sees opportunities before other players recognize them. Arthur described watching her matches and noticing something unusual. She wasn't always the strongest player physically. She wasn't always the fastest. She didn't overwhelm opponents with pure power. Yet somehow she consistently found solutions. Again and again. When rallies became complicated. When momentum shifted. When matches became chaotic. She seemed to remain calm while everyone else panicked. And that's where Arthur believed her true value existed. Many young players possess talent. Many players can hit incredible shots. Many players can dominate when everything is working perfectly. But what happens when things stop going according to plan? That's where careers are often defined. That's where champions separate themselves. And according to Arthur Fils, Alex Eala possesses something that can't be measured by statistics. The ability to think clearly inside a storm. The ability to reset when things collapse. The ability to adapt in real time. Those qualities rarely appear on scoreboards. Yet they often determine who wins and who loses. And Arthur had been watching closely enough to notice. The deeper he went into his explanation, the more people began understanding why his comments sounded so sincere. This wasn't hype. This wasn't publicity. This wasn't someone repeating popular opinions. This was a fellow competitor identifying qualities he respected at the deepest level. And then came the detail that made everything even more remarkable. Arthur revealed that he had never actually met Alex Eala. No long conversations. No friendship. No shared experiences. Nothing. His opinion had been formed entirely through observation. Watching matches. Studying performances. Paying attention to moments others overlooked. Which made his praise feel even more genuine. There was nothing for him to gain. No obligation. No reason to say it. Yet he said it anyway. And that's why the tennis community couldn't stop talking about it. Because in an era where athletes often choose safe answers and diplomatic responses, Arthur Fils chose honesty. The kind of honesty that creates headlines. The kind of honesty that starts debates. The kind of honesty that forces people to look at a player differently. But what happened next made the story even bigger. Because once fans started revisiting Alex Eala's recent matches through the lens Arthur described, they began noticing exactly what he was talking about. And the evidence was impossible to ignore. What made Arthur Fils' statement even more powerful was what Alex Eala had been going through when he said it. From the outside, many fans saw the headlines. The victories. The growing popularity. The viral highlights. But behind those moments was a young player carrying enormous pressure. Every tournament felt like an examination. Every loss triggered questions. Every win created even bigger expectations. For years, Alex had been labeled the future of Philippine tennis. A title that sounds inspiring until you realize how heavy it becomes. Because being called the future means people stop seeing you as a person. They start seeing you as a promise, a responsibility, a symbol. And symbols are expected to be perfect. What nobody realized was that Alex had spent much of her career learning how to carry those expectations while still trying to develop as a player. That balancing act isn't easy. In fact, it's one of the reasons many young talents never reach their full potential. The pressure becomes louder than their own thoughts. The criticism becomes louder than their confidence. The expectations become heavier than their love for the game. But Alex kept moving forward. Not because the path was easy, because she refused to stop. And that determination was becoming impossible for fellow professionals to ignore. Arthur Fils wasn't the first player to notice it. He was simply the latest. And perhaps the most unexpected. Because while fans were focused on rankings and results, players were paying attention to something else. The moments between the moments. The reactions after mistakes. The body language during difficult stretches. The ability to stay composed when everything seemed to be falling apart. Professional athletes notice those things immediately. They understand how difficult they are. And that's why Arthur's comments resonated so strongly throughout the tennis community. He wasn't complimenting Alex's highlights. He was complimenting her mindset. That's a completely different level of respect. As his interview continued spreading online, thousands of fans started revisiting Alex's recent performances. And suddenly they began seeing details they had previously overlooked. The way she remained calm after losing important points. The way she adjusted tactics when opponents changed strategy. The way she continued fighting even when momentum swung against her. Small moments. Invisible moments. Moments that rarely become headlines. Yet those moments often reveal the future before the future arrives. The more people watched, the more Arthur's comments began making sense. Then something interesting happened. Several analysts started comparing Alex's career trajectory to some of the sport's biggest success stories. Not because her game was identical. Not because her results were identical. But because the pattern felt familiar. Many great champions weren't initially defined by overwhelming power. They weren't always the strongest athletes. They weren't always the most physically dominant. Instead, they possessed something harder to identify. An unusual understanding of competition, a unique ability to solve problems, a calmness that seemed to appear when pressure became overwhelming. Those qualities often separate very good players from future champions. And that's exactly what Arthur believed he was seeing. But the real reason his comments generated so much attention had nothing to do with tennis technique. It had everything to do with credibility. Arthur Fils had absolutely no reason to say any of it. Think about that for a moment. He wasn't promoting a teammate. He wasn't helping a sponsor. He wasn't defending a friend. He wasn't benefiting from the attention. If anything, he could have avoided the topic entirely. Instead, he voluntarily placed Alex Eala's name beside some of the biggest young stars in the sport. And then he elevated her above the conversation. That authenticity is incredibly rare. Fans recognized it immediately. That's why social media exploded. That's why sports programs replayed the clip. That's why discussions continued for days. People weren't reacting to a compliment. They were reacting to sincerity. In modern sports, audiences can usually tell when an athlete is giving a rehearsed answer. This didn't feel rehearsed. It felt real. And real moments travel further than manufactured ones ever can. As the story continued gaining momentum, another fascinating question emerged. How would Alex Eala respond? Would she address the comments? Would she acknowledge the praise? Would she embrace the attention? Or would she do what she had always done? Focus on tennis. The answer revealed a lot about who she is. Because while the tennis world debated Arthur's remarks, Alex continued preparing for her next challenge. Practice sessions continued. Training continued. The work continued. The spotlight grew brighter. Yet her routine remained largely unchanged. That response may seem ordinary. In reality, it's incredibly difficult. Many athletes become distracted by praise. Others become overwhelmed by expectations. Alex appeared determined to remain grounded. And that decision may ultimately be one of her greatest strengths. Because praise can be dangerous, especially for young athletes. It can create comfort. It can create complacency. It can create pressure. The challenge isn't earning recognition. The challenge is continuing to improve after receiving it. And that's the challenge Alex now faced. Not just as a promising player, but as someone increasingly viewed as a future star. The expectations were rising. The attention was growing. The conversations were getting bigger. Yet the scoreboard still demanded results. That's the reality of professional tennis. Potential creates excitement. Performance creates legacy. And Alex understood that better than anyone. Which brings us to the most important part of Arthur Fils' comments. He never said Alex Eala had already reached the top. He never claimed she had accomplished everything. He never suggested her journey was complete. In many ways, his praise was built around the opposite idea. The belief that her best tennis might still be ahead of her. The belief that qualities impossible to measure today could eventually produce extraordinary results tomorrow. And that's what made his words so memorable. They weren't about the present. They were about possibility. The possibility that the player he had been quietly studying could become something much bigger than people currently realized. The possibility that the composure, intelligence, and resilience he admired would eventually translate into major success. The possibility that years from now, this interview might look less like a compliment and more like a prediction. Whether that prediction comes true remains unknown. That's the beauty of sports. Nothing is guaranteed. Every match creates new questions. Every season changes the story. Every challenge reveals something new. But one thing became crystal clear after Arthur Fils spoke. Alex Eala had earned something that statistics cannot provide. The respect of a fellow competitor. The admiration of someone fighting his own battle at the highest level. And in professional sports, that kind of recognition is priceless. Because trophies can be won. Rankings can change. Records can fall. But genuine respect from peers is earned. And once earned, it says more than almost any number ever could. For Arthur Fils, the statement lasted only a few seconds. For Alex Eala, it became another defining chapter in a story that continues to grow. And for tennis fans around the world, it served as a reminder that sometimes the most important signs of greatness appear long before the biggest victories arrive. Sometimes they appear in unexpected moments, unexpected interviews, unexpected observations, unexpected praise. And sometimes, all it takes is one honest answer from someone who understands the game to make the entire world look at a player differently. That is exactly what happened here. And if Arthur Fils is right, the most remarkable part of Alex Eala's story hasn't happened yet. It's still waiting just over the horizon.